What's been the most interesting thing? You go to a different country, and the thing that they focus on or are fascinated by or are so surprising for them, as opposed to an American audience. Maybe we take stuff for granted. It helps you see your books in a new way, I guess.
Well, in the greater world, they don't really mind that I'm a Southerner. Mm-hmm. They think that's fascinating. When I go up north, people just think that we're burning crosses in our yard and drinking mint juleps all the time.
But you have to write the books too.
Exactly. Yeah, in longhand. Mm-hmm. And I remember very clearly my first publicist at a different publisher said to me, "Does Atlanta have an airport?" And I said, "Well, we have the busiest airport in the world." And she said, "Really?"
She's obviously never flown to London.
Well, there's a kind of disconnect about the fact that Atlanta has running water and things like that, and there's of course obviously the history of slavery and that sort of thing, and the attitude that everyone in the South has this sort of racist background, and completely discounting that a lot of black people come from the South. I live in a city, Atlanta, that's very dynamic, and I'm a minority there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it will ever be done? Because it's always being built, and it's never...
I don't think so.
No, it'll never be done.
But we'll just tear stuff down and rebuild it once it's done.
And that's part of Cop Town. One of the great things there is, of course, the rookies versus the veterans, versus the whites versus the blacks, but then the female cops, they get into their little locker room, their safety, their haven, and the female officers of color have their own separate area, and there's antagonism there, because people just... they weren't trusting each other.
Yeah. And, I think that's very much how the city was at that time. I think now it's not about race, it's about class. Yeah. And I think that's really how it's going to be for a while, because we're seeing that difference. And when I was writing Maggie and Kate, the thing that distinguishes them the most is Kate has the freedom of having financial security. Mm-hmm. And she looks at the world very differently because of that. And Maggie does not. And she looks at it as a much darker place. She feels like she's a very marginal person, and that at any moment everything could be taken away from her. And living like that informs who she is. So just drilling down in that with them gave me a greater understanding of their characters. And I think that's true for a lot of people. I love that show where they trace your genealogy.
There's a couple of them, but you know your roots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I saw one on Vanessa Williams, who's amazing and very talented. But you look back in her history, and her ancestors were, in Virginia, they were politicians and they were very successful people. And, of course, there was a backlash to that. But successful people tend to continue to be successful and raise successful children. And there's sort of a genetic encoding to that. And there's also the advantage that people who are successful have. And they pass that on to their children so they don't struggle as much. And, you think that's the American dream, right? Is that your kids won't struggle like you do.
Right.
And the sense that
used to be the American dream.
Well, the sense that we're going backward, I think, it has really affected our identity. And it didn't start now. It started in the 1970s.
If not, yeah. Did you read The Unwinding by George Packer? It's a nonfiction book about, it's a really good nonfiction narrative. It came out last year, the year before. And it follows like different people at Silicon Valley.
Oh, yeah, I did read that. Yeah.
Really good book about that, the whole idea of the American dream and what's happened to it, and how so many people in different areas have so much in common as far as just trying to get by. Well, are we done with Kate and Maggie?
No,
they're there. No, yeah.
Well, I have to do more Will Trent, or people will kill me.
Right.
And I've got a great story. I'm so excited about it. It's really, it's not even that old thing where the author always wants to be working on the book that they're going to write next. Mm-hmm. I've got a lot of ideas for the story and different things happening, so I'm excited about that. So I think I'll do a couple more Will Trents and then eventually go back to Maggie and Kate, because I do want to get at least to the Atlanta child murders.
Why aren't your books more violent? Because when you look at the world, it's just, there's nothing worse than what you can read in the paper every day. And you hear about every horrific thing, and if it happens anywhere in the world, we all hear about it now. That's part of it. Mm-hmm. Every time there's a school bus that crashes, you'll hear about it. It could be in Timbuktu. But there are things that just come up, and you think, when people say, oh, the books are so violent, I'm like, my God, they're nowhere near as violent as life is.
It's interesting, because when I started off, it was, and God, please, Sarah Paretsky, Sue Grafton, wonderful women writing really great stuff, hard-boiled stuff. But, as far as the level of violence writing about it very openly. You know, me, Kathy Reichs, Patricia Cornwell, we were the three gals doing it, you know, when I first started writing these really frank novels where you didn't really know if any of the protagonists were safe. And talking about autopsies and violence against women in a very realistic way. I mean, that was something that was really shocking to a lot of people. And so I remember my first tour, people were asking, you know, how can you be a woman and write about such violence? And, you know, my sisters could tell you I'm certainly more violent. I mean, there's the perception that women can't write about it or shouldn't write about it. Some people will say that. But, you know, the thing is, I write the sort of book that I love reading. And women like me have been reading, you know, Silence of the Lambs or the Stieg Larsson trilogy or, you know, extremely violent books. I mean, I love Jack Reacher, but those are very violent, you know. A lot of people get hurt, and he may just shoot him in the kneecap, but that's still being shot, you know. Exactly. But I think women get more attention for it. Now, I can't complain about it because it did get me a lot of attention, but I just think it's interesting. And I do think as I've gotten older, I hate to say this, I've sort of learned to use it.
Your birthday's in January, by the way.
That's right. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
I've learned to use it more judiciously and to do a slow build. So I've maybe gone from Halloween to Jaws. And, you know, also I think that a writer's job is for every book to be different. And my job is to make sure every book is better. And so I want to do different things to make it better and find different ways to make it better. And so, you know, a book like Coptown, honestly, mostly it's men killed. And people don't care about as much when men die. It's not as tragic as when women die. And I even have a line about that in the next book that's coming out, The Truth About Pretty Girls, where a young woman is missing, and the character
makes... She's blonde, you're in luck.
Exactly, right. And white, middle class.
Birmingham,
and the
Alabama,
character makes a comment that no one seems particularly concerned if an unattractive woman goes missing. And, you know, it's true. So, you know, I have to be really careful what I write. And sometimes my victims in my books aren't particularly likable or someone you would root for. But still, I think what compels people to read is I'm telling stories about characters. And to me, that's what's most important because, you know,
otherwise
I'm from the South.
Sadism if it was
right.
Just
it's all
violence.
about the characters. And it's not so much the violence as what it leaves behind, how it affects people.
Well, that's... one of the strongest things about your books, how you see something happen to a character, you put them through the mill, but it reverberates for 4, 5, 10 books on. It's still part of their lives. It still affects who they are, how they behave. It's not something that happened and they move on and they're John Wayne.
Right.
It really affects them from all the way through. Rape obviously is a constant, and I should apologize because I used to think that rape statistics were somehow a little off. I thought, well, that just sounds too high. You know, when you talk about women who suffer from sexual assault, one out of, whatever it might be, 5, 8, I go, oh my God, that just sounds way, maybe they're dealing with some that are just regret, but the more we hear about it in real life, the more, Bill Cosby,
right.
The more we see that just rape is just a constant.
Well, and also, a lot of police officers don't believe women, just pro forma, when they claim rape. And it's interesting because there was a really huge study done. Why is this, that beat cops don't take these... Not all of them, but don't take these seriously. I mean, you're from Florida.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Florida State.
It's my brother's school, not mine. I went to the University of Florida.
Oh, okay. Wow. Auburn. But 8 to 10% of rape claims are, the woman regretted or whatever. They're false. 8 to 10%. If you think about just the reported cases, according to the FBI, is almost 250,000 in a year. Okay? 10% of that is nothing. So you think about all those women who were raped and the cases weren't followed up on, or it's if this was happening in Darfur, George Clooney speaks up about it. Here, no one really makes a lot of noise until now, and I think that it's interesting because I think it started with the whole NFL thing, and it's reaching a crescendo. And if you know anything about women, that's typically how it is. I have so many girlfriends who left their husband or their boyfriend because for the 50th time, they had to clean the dishes out of the sink. And the first 49 times, they didn't say anything. But it was that 50th time that they just snapped and said, you need to get out of here. And I mean, I just think for a lot of women, it's reached that critical mass. Now, will it maintain that? Will it peter out. Who knows? But at least we're talking about it.
I always deal in entertainment, but in college I worked at the school paper, which dealt with hard news as well, and I was an editor. And I always felt bad about keeping the identity of a woman who filed charges of rape anonymous, partially because I thought, well, you're accusing someone of a crime, and that's going to try them for life. Why should? But more importantly, I just felt like it was contributing to the. I understood why we did it and why we still do it, but I felt like it was contributing to the idea that they had something to be ashamed of.
Right.
And I thought, no. And the more when women stepped forward for Bill Cosby and identified themselves, that's when it started to steamroll into something people paid attention to, because they had a face and a person. They couldn't dismiss
Critical
it.
mass.
And it's so strong for them to speak out and be visible, because stupid people like me go, there can't be that many people, because they haven't come forward and say so. And until they do, it's hard to know what's going on.
Well, I think there's a greater issue there, and that's shame.
Yeah.
And a lot of women think that they don't say, why did he do that to me? They say, what did I do wrong?
Of course.
And then I had a friend who was attacked a few years ago. And I heard about it, and I said, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? And we talked about it. And she said, you're the only person who hasn't said to me, why were you in that part of town? And it's true, because women can be our own worst enemies. And we do ask those questions of other women. Well, why were you drinking too much? Or why, we give women all the responsibility when they're drunk, and we don't give men any responsibility when they're drunk. So there's a complete disconnect there. And, how hard is it not to rape somebody? But the problem is it's such a small percentage of men who are doing this, but everyone else is looking the other way.
Just like child molestation.
Exactly.
So it's far more widespread and everything. But so you're suggesting that a woman who's passed out drunk is not an invitation for assault and rape.
No.
She's allowed to be passed out drunk and still not get raped.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the world I want to live in.
Well, when I started your series, because I just started it, I read Coptown, and then I started beginning, so I'm not all the way through yet. And I avoided any knowledge about who was who and what. I started the book. I didn't know who the protagonist was. I thought it might be Lena. I thought it might be Sarah. I thought it might be Jeffrey. I didn't know, which was one of the strengths of the book and the books that go on since then. So that's really nice, because you just don't know who's, like, any one of them could have died, but on the other hand, they all had a lot of weight to them. And Lena, of course, is, Lena and Sarah have survived assault and rape. Horrific. But Lena especially is a fascinating character, as far as getting in the mind of a woman and empathizing with her and seeing how she can stay in a relationship that's abusive, and when she doesn't, or when she does, and that sort of thing. And that must be, I'm sure you're writing a book that you mean to be entertaining. You're also tackling social issues, and it's easy to do, you say in the past, things if you want to bring up about how women are treated. But these are books set in the present, and I'm sure you just get floods of letters and emotional connections from women who talk to you about.
I do. And it really is interesting, going back to what we were talking about before, how many of them feel ashamed, which to me is a second assault, that they should feel this shame.
Which Lena feels, of course, completely.
Absolutely, because she's a very strong woman, and she has this idea of herself that it won't happen to her because she's strong.
She kicked my ass.
Yeah. And the thing is, unfortunately, her recovery is not something you read about a lot in fiction. I mean, memoir tackled it for a while, but crime fiction really, if a woman is assaulted, she's either turned into further victimized, and she's almost catatonic, or she's this tough, nasty bitch, and there's no in between, and both of them are saved by some great guy making love to them, And with Lena, I wanted to show what statistically is more probable. Around 80% of women who are sexually assaulted get assaulted again, or end up in an abusive relationship. And a lot of people, when I wrote about Lena in the first book where she's assaulted, said, I can't believe you brought her back in the second book, because it's such a
damaged goods.
Exactly. And so it was really important to me to write about her and tell her story. The funny thing that happened was this female police officer came up to me and said, I don't buy it that Lena would be in an abusive relationship. And I said, really? Because statistically, female cops are more likely to be in abusive relationships. And she said, oh yeah, I know a lot of female cops who are in bad relationships like that. But I just don't think Lena would do it, right? Because she identified with Lena. So if it wouldn't happen to her, it wouldn't happen to Lena.
Wow.
Yeah.
And of course, you had your series set in Grant County, and you had your series set in Atlanta, because you decided reality was impinging a little bit, and then like some sort of Star Wars, Star Trek crossover, they merged.
Oh, wouldn't that be cool? Though?
2009 with Undone, is it?
Triptych.
I beg your pardon.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Undone.
That was Undone.
Yeah.
And Triptych was the first.
Right.
And
I'm glad someone's paying attention.
Yeah, somebody has to. You just have to write them, and that just took you to a whole different level, I think, as far as complexity in the world you're in, and a responsibility to your characters. What drew you to that? What made you?
Well, it's a little bit about what we touched on before. Grant County had pedophiles and child molesters and sadists and murderers. I mean, it was worse than Congress, And so I kept thinking, well, I can only have so much before everybody wants to leave.
Yeah.
And also, to me, I thought the things that were happening that I was writing about would have to touch them personally eventually. And so I made a very conscious choice about how to end the series.
Well, they did from the beginning, really. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And, and so when I was writing the fourth book in the series, I knew that it was going to end. I knew how it would end. And I knew that eventually some of the characters would be in Will Trent's world. So around that time, I started thinking about Triptych, which is Will Trent's first book. And then I had to get him to be the kind of guy that Sarah Linton would be interested in. Which meant he kind of had to get his crap together, right? Because he's in this awful relationship with his girlfriend who's really nasty to him. And, he had to kind of find himself a little bit before he would be someone Sarah would be interested in. So I wrote Triptych and Fractured to do that. And then he meets Sarah in Undone, and he's kind of ready for that.
The fourth book is the small, the dark. That's the one where you have the flashback to how they
Indelible.
first met.
Yeah,
Indelible.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the one where they first met.
Right, and they go to Alabama.
Yeah. That's where I got family, Birmingham. So I know Alabama well, but I didn't. They're Roll Tide. They're not Auburn fans at all.
Oh,
whatsoever.
no.
So I don't
well,
know.
this is over, sir.
I was reading the book and I didn't know if I could continue because
Yeah,
the home's
yeah.
littered with Auburn stuff. I went to the University of Florida. I went for 7 lovely years and didn't graduate, which I think trumps your 2 years without graduating.
Yeah, three.
Oh, 3,
Yeah,
I beg your pardon. Yeah. What made you move on? Did you find out what you wanted to do and were ready to move on like I did?
Yeah, and I wrote a paper and a professor said it was too pithy. And I just thought, I'm out of here. I'll show you.
You wanted more words?
I don't know. It was transcendentalism, so, that explains a lot, doesn't it? I had basically taken all the English classes I could. They were going to make me take math.
That's
so
exactly what I did. Well, I took playwriting and all the fun stuff. And then they said, what about Spanish? I was at 7 a.m. and I wasn't down for that.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
But how did you end up with a sign business?
Well, I was painting houses, and
just
then,
like my professor, Paget Powell, the writer.
Oh, really?
He's a house painter too for a while.
Yeah. I was painting, and then summer came, and we were supposed to paint outside. And I remember very clearly being on a ladder and taking the brush, and the paint was just this ungodly clump of something, right? Like if Satan hocked a loogie, that's what it would look like. And I thought, and I was drenched. My feet were wet because it was so hot. And I thought, there has to be something better. And so I called a friend, and she was working in a sign company, and she got a job there for me. And I worked there a few years and saw how easy it was, and then started my own business.
So was it painting? You weren't doing neon, or what were you doing?
Yeah, I did a little bit of everything. At the end, I just mostly sold and let everybody else do the work, which is awesome. But, it's all computer generated. So it cuts out vinyl letters, and you transfer the letters onto the sign. I did a very small bit of painting. And there's not really as much art to it as you think. I mean, it's not super easy, but you use a grid.
Yeah.
And this grid has half of it is blue. And this is, so it's a lot simpler than it sounds. But, it gave me time to write, which was what was important.
When was that important first? When were you writing as a little kid? Were you always
all
writing?
The time,
yeah.
All the time. And most of my stories were about my sisters meeting some violent death. And then I got older, and actually in 9th grade, I had an English teacher who said, you're good, but you can be better. And that's the first time anybody had said that to me. And it just challenged me and made me want to learn the craft of being a writer. Because I think you're either a writer or you're not. But you can be a good writer or you can be a bad writer. And I'm not a lazy person, really. I mean, I'm lazy in some ways. But as far as my writing, I'm very focused about it. And I'm very conscious that this is a gift I have and that it would be wrong not to try to do something with it. And I love it. I mean, it really is part of my identity.
That teacher gave you great feedback. Do you remember the first story that you read that you didn't hate after you were done with it?
Oh God, I was so arrogant. I loved all of them. I wrote this story about these two guys going camping, and it was very controversial because they were gay, and I was living in a little small southern town, and I had two gay guys.
Were
and
they friends, or were they?
They were best friends.
Oh, they were really good friends.
And they ended up killing the father. So that was it.
Was he molesting one, or what was it?
No, he was just a bad guy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They wanted to be together.
Okay.
I thought it was really moving. So
your teacher probably was scandalized.
She wasn't, and that was really important because she worked on. I don't know how she felt about the subject matter. Probably thinking, "What the hell have you been watching, ninth grader?" But what she said was, let's work on this and let's make it a good story. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's an important lesson. Content. Subject matter is not as important as the execution, and I'm writing books where violent things happen, and I think people read that and find it more palatable because they care so much about the characters, and they see there's a point to it, and they feel what the characters feel because they have relationships with the characters, and especially someone in a series like Will Trent or Sarah Linton. I feel like my readers think of them as actual people they know, and they're checking on them every year, and they have some kind of good relationship with them.
I don't ever remember not reading. My mom says she taught me how to read, but I'm like, well, I don't remember that at all.
Right.
So I read to you, but I was always reading. But I do remember the first adult book I read, not in content as such, but it was The Death of Arthur by Sir Thomas Hilary.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it was
You were a lot smarter than me.
well, I was. But it was just big words. It was King Arthur, but it was big words. I was like, some of them I could pronounce like Lancelot. Others I was like, I knew what they looked like, and I read the book, and I just felt like that was a book. It wasn't Hardy Boys.
Right.
Do you remember the first book where you?
God, John Jakes.
Okay.
And it's adult because it had sex in it. Yeah. And when I read it, I remember very clearly. I got it from my sister.
Was it a hardcover, paperback?
Hardcover, and I put it down, and it opened right to the sex. I read all the classics. That V.C. Andrews. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that was incest till I was in college. I just thought it was a beautiful love story. Lace. Mm-hmm. Mistral's daughter, all that crap, I'm sure that anyone who saw what I was reading at that time would think that I would just end up imploding with disgust, but I loved reading those trashy books. It was just a lot of fun.
Well, and in genres where you find great plot. There was a while where in literary fiction it was always a college professor working on their novel.
Right,
and that got a little tiresome, and you had to go to children's books or mystery or sci-fi to find a novel with ideas and with, big juicy plots, which is what a lot of great fiction is. Right.
Well, and, like Margaret Atwood writes Handmaid's Tale, which is firmly in fantasy science fiction, and they say, it transcends the genre,
Did P.D. James was she the one that made us all transcend the genre?
I think Phyllis transcended everything. She was amazing.
Who?
Phyllis.
Okay,
she was just amazing. Absolutely. And she was in many ways a product of her time also, because if you read some of her, how she voted in the House of Lords, for instance, you think, whoa, okay. But then you read her books, and she's introducing all these interesting multicultural, gay, women in charge kinds of characters that are contrary to how she votes, Mm-hmm. So I don't know. You think, is this because of her age that she thought it was good for her, but not for the general people?
She was 90, that's very upper class.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is it that typical English class system where, what's good for me is good for me and you do this, I don't know, but she did some amazing things, and she did set her own genre, I think.
Mm-hmm. But surely it was long before that where people discarded the idea that, a mystery or a science fiction. It's been since the beginning that we've had great books in there. It's just either a good book or a bad book.
Right. But, people who are really smart always say it transcends the genre. That's their fallback.
Meaning it's a good book.
Right.
Because sometimes they never say literary fiction transcends the genre. They just say it's not good.
Exactly, yeah.
So you were reading these trashy novels. When did you read something and go, wow, that's a book. That is something that...
I think probably... And I never read in college because it makes you hate reading. To read books that you don't want necessarily
pick. That's why I took the class.
Well, but it was stuff that I just really didn't like.
Such as?
Oh, I hate to say this. I mean, I love Mrs. Dalloway, but Orlando, I'm still reading that.
Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse are just tremendous.
Yeah, but I had professors who were sadists, and
the movie's better than the book. It really is. Tilda Swinton. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you've never seen it?
No, because it's like my nemesis.
The movie is actually very good.
Okay.
It's not like Waves in Orlando. You actually will enjoy the movie.
Okay.
Yeah, and Tilda Swinton's a marvelous actor.
I'll look for it.
It's well worth.
But some of the stuff like Margaret Drabble and
I love Margaret Drabble.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to name everybody you love, right? I just wasn't in a place for it, and I was a night student, so because I worked during the day and. And I was at a university where everybody did that. So it was very much a sort of working person night school kind of, and it didn't really resonate to me in my life, Yeah. Of course, you could argue that B.C. Andrews didn't either, but it was enough of an escape, right?
Yeah.
And then I remember when I got out of college, all these books I had missed, I just ate them up. And I remember going to the bookstore and just going crazy. And I think that's when I found Sarah Paretsky. I'd never read her before. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, holy crap, what have I been missing?
You said you went to college and you were done. You'd taken all the good classes and you went and worked at a sign. But were your parents ever scared? I mean, you're saying I want to be when did you tell them I want to be a writer? Or did you keep that secret until you'd actually...
I did keep it secret. I mean, they knew I liked writing.
Yeah.
But
But you had to have a real job.
I did. And my dad said to me, I want you to have your dreams fulfilled, but I never want you to have to move back home.
For many reasons.
And for many reasons, right. But there was a stigma to that when I was in school.
It's normal.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a loser if you did that,
right?
I
mean, Sarah's sister Tessa lived we're like, well, of course, everybody, who the heck wouldn't?
Right. Well, yeah.
If she moves out, I'm taking the garage.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a very different mindset even to think about just being pushed out on your own. I was watching some documentary about, I forget. Product of getting older. This guy, he said he moved out from Alabama and he moved to California in the 1970s, and he was surfing and he was water skiing and he was doing all this, and I thought, gosh, kids don't do that today. Mm-hmm. During the 1970s, a long distance phone call was a big deal. Yeah. I mean, I remember when my sister went to Florida for a month with friends, and we never heard from her because it was just too expensive to call.
Yeah.
And kids now, they have cell phones and the tethers that their parents have around them, and it's just different. And I don't think that there's that free spirit where they say, I'm going to go move away from you and go across the country, and I'll check in with you once a month. People just don't do that anymore.
My nephew moved from Birmingham, Alabama to San Francisco for a while. And he said, I think it's the most opposite city of Birmingham in the world.
Yeah.
Like I could go to...
Sewage.
Netherlands,
sewage.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
There's nothing more opposite than Birmingham than San Francisco. You write, of course, in binge. I think you're a binge writer.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are binge eaters. You're a binge writer. You probably binge eat while you write.
Yeah, I wish.
Because when you say you're in the kitchen and then the living room,
right?
You're not cooking in the kitchen. You're just eating, right?
No. I use this big thing. It's got a clock on it called the stove. I use that timer on that to time myself because it's so hard to get into writing, and so I'll set the timer for 30 minutes and tell myself, you can do anything for 30 minutes. And then usually when the timer goes off, I still want to keep writing. But it just makes me sit down and do it.
Mm-hmm. And but then you have a place that your dad built.
Mm-hmm. A cabin, yeah.
Your dad built a cabin.
Yeah.
Was that after, what point was that?
I had the land for a while, and he built it.
It's the only thing that lasts.
Yeah. Katie Scarlett. He built it, I think, around the time of my third book.
Mm-hmm.
And
like,
yeah.
I'm gonna buy some land.
Oh God, no! I was terrified. I was like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, okay, I'll do it, and I'll make sure the cost doesn't get out of hand, and and it was a very simple cabin, and fortunately, I've done well enough so I can get some nicer things. But I always had a television. I can't live like an animal.
No.
But as I got more successful, I was able to do things like actually build a bona fide office that I can work in, as opposed to just sitting in a recliner in the living room.
When it's Georgia, do you have an outhouse or do you have an actual bathroom in the cabin? Because it's Georgia.
Yeah. Well, we have running water.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have that inside.
Well, it's hard because you walk out barefoot to that outhouse.
It's unpleasant.
Yeah.
When I grew up, a really big show for me was Hill Street Blues. That was a really, still my favorite show of all time. And just as far as empathy for cops and knowing what they go through, I would get nervous when they'd go on a call, especially domestic disputes, as you know. Those are the scary ones. And it just was really just changed my mind about TV and about what was the show. You were watching, probably had the TV on 24 hours a day like we did.
Yeah.
It was just always on. When was there a show that you just couldn't miss and it was actually a really great show?
Cagney and Lacey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, if you think about it, I mean, there are some great shows that have women leads.
Well, there's Pepper. There's Angie Dickinson before that. And, of course, Prime Suspect after that.
But, you know, it was the first in America serious show about two women. A serious one. You know, Rizzoli and Isles is great.
Yeah.
It's very different from what Tess is writing. But you don't really see television shows with two female leads. And, you know, I think that's a shame.
Were you on a roller coaster because that show was canceled and was brought back?
I know. I wrote a letter.
Did you? Yeah, really?
I was part of that. Yeah,
that's
a very
awesome.
small part.
And that was when you had to type it out.
Actually, yeah, exactly. Go to the post office.
You really had to do something.
Well, it's fantastic storytelling. It really is, and it holds up because I have them on DVD.
Did you get the box set?
Yeah.
Finally, it took forever.
Right. Yeah.
It took forever, but and that really you can see how. It holds up, and you can see the world that they're in, but you can see how far we've come, and you know, it really that's what you want to do with your books as well. I'm sure you want to, you know, create a document of the era you're in now, and hopefully see things change.
Right.
I mean, you don't write to change the world; you write to tell a good story, but you write to bring stuff up to the surface, like other writers always have.
Absolutely.
You got to engage in the world that you're in, and that's why you're talking about violence, and that's why you're talking about rape, and that's why you're talking about women in the workforce.
Absolutely.
Is there any sense of things changing, or do you get more depressed as you get older, or do you get more positive?
I'm depressed because I'm getting older.
Well, you know, if you go back to the 70s, you can see it's easy to say, oh, nothing changes, but a lot.
It has, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is now we talk about it. It was just part of breathing back then, you know, sexism and racism and that sort of thing. And if you stood up and said, don't do that, then you were the outsider. And now I think it's the people who are the offenders who are the outsiders, because the majority of society, and part of it is the internet, because we're all so interconnected, but the majority of society is very vocal now, probably because it's easy, about things that are wrong.
Well, and that's when it changes, when people are embarrassed to say, there's always, of course, going to be racist and hateful people.
Right.
They just know they can't get away with it in polite society.
Right.
And that's a big change in the South.
Absolutely.
And in the North and in the East.
Yeah,
you had Archie
everywhere.
Bunker up there. You had whoever you had down South. Is there? But you were a woman, and you left college early.
Yep.
You're still a woman.
Yeah.
All right. So you left college early. Your parents weren't scared. They weren't worried. Were they angry? Were they upset?
You know, I'm the youngest of three girls.
You weren't getting married.
We're all self-employed. And I think we get that from my dad. Growing up, my dad's mother was abused by my grandfather in a really horrific way, and she had absolutely no power. And so for my father, it was very important for us to have a sense of money and to be able to take care of ourselves. And I say I have a classic Southern upbringing because my dad taught me how to change a tire, but my mom taught me how to flirt so I don't have to. But he showed us how to change a tire. We know how electricity works. You know, we know how plumbing works. We have a basic understanding of those things. And he made us have savings accounts just in our names when we were younger. And actually, you know, he put that frugality in me so that I was able to buy a house when I was 25 years old. So he really made us respect money and understand that we needed to not just do what a lot of women do or did, which is get married and turn the finances over to their husbands. You know, so I think he just was very conscious that we needed to be able to take care of ourselves, and we have that feeling of independence.